organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
Buenos días, ¿me escuchan?
Sí, embajador.
¿Qué tal? ¿Cómo han estado? ¿Todo bien?
Todo bien, embajador. No lo vemos.
Es que estoy en otra reunión también con lo de Colombia. Perfecto. Estoy conectado en dos lados, aquí escuchándolo y allá viendo todo.
Perfecto, Francisco, aquí estamos a la espera, cualquier cosa estamos avisando que sea por texto, bueno, vamos a estar pendientes de la reunión.
Ok, bueno, gusto en saludarlos, cualquier cosa estoy aquí a la orden también.
Muchas gracias, embajador.
Bueno.
More than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
Development cooperation has always been a priority for the OAS. The OAS SETI works with all member states to identify common challenges and define solutions through policy dialogue, which is transformed into action through technical cooperation initiatives. Policy dialogue is central to our work in development. The OAS SETI convenes development leaders in 11 ministerial meetings and high-level processes on priority areas such as competitiveness, labor, education, among others. Technical cooperation initiatives emerge from ongoing dialogue and are therefore established with built-in political support. All of our actions place people at the center, generating a multiplier effect in the region. We enhance human capacity by working with key stakeholders. This strengthens institutions, improving policies and programs. benefiting millions of people in the Americas. Our ability to deliver results relies on broad collaboration. Partnerships for Development, Cooperación Solidaria, is a unique OAS concept which recognizes that each member state, regardless of its size, wealth, or level of development, has value to share and can learn from others. This concept also includes close collaboration with other partners, amplifying our reach and impact. As we mark 70 years of work on development, we take a look back.
Luis, ¿cómo estamos?
Hola,
¿cómo está Rodrigo? Bien, ¿ustedes?
Muy bien, tocayo.
Yo creo que quórum empezamos con
Ya empezamos, tenemos Bolivia y bueno, pero Bolivia y no puede estar la espera que se vuelvan a conectar. Pero, oye, tenemos una duda rápida. Hay posibilidades de que haya una elección. ¿Eso cómo funciona? Eso es por orden,
No, el procedimiento es la presidenta.
This long evolution, driven by member states, has fine-tuned our unique model to support inter-American development.
Por sorteo ya va a tener ahí, no sé,
por sorteo.
Los nombres de los países va a tomar uno, y con ese se empieza la votación, va a ir empezando por el país que ella elija, digamos, inicia con Argentina.
Pero ella va a tener una bolsa con los nombres de los países.
Ella ya lo tiene.
Today, all of our efforts fall into 5 strategic priorities: inclusive and competitive economies, sustainable development, education and human development, decent work for all, development cooperation and partnerships. These are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals and the regional attainment of the 2030 Agenda. These priorities are also areas where the OAS SETI has extensive experience and proven impact.
Porque oficial lo ganamos nosotros y el resultado lo da el
embajador Méndez. Perfecto. Sí,
va a ser 1-1, Rodrigo, ¿no?
Sí.
Me escucho.
Te escuchas con un poco de eco.
Sí, me escucho cuando. Ahora ya no.
Y entonces tiene que ser inefablemente con cámara y micrófono. Tiene que ver al delegado. Si el señor está con el servicio malo y no hay imagen, pues no vale cosa.
Ya se tuvo alguna experiencia así en alguna votación similar. Entonces fue que tuvieran a un delegado de backup conectado como participante. Entonces, si se va, por ejemplo, la señal del embajador de otro país, el segundo, entonces solicite la palabra y él haga.
Salga en pantalla.
Es que se llega a votación.
Claro, sí se llega a votación.
Es sobre el proyecto de resolución.
Porque no recuerdo, como hicimos la comisión general, yo no tuve.
No, en la asamblea, bueno, ¿te acuerdas en la asamblea al final, cuando fue la resolución en Nicaragua?
Bueno,
ya hubo una votación. Exactamente el mismo procedimiento.
We have come a long way.
Estamos ready entonces.
Rodrigo, ¿podés bajar un poquito tu cámara?
Rodrigo Hidrobo.
Perfecto. Listo. Aquí estoy ya atrás de la línea. Cualquier cosa que necesiten.
Perfecto. Excelente.
But still have much work to do.
Cualquier duda que haya. Muchísimas gracias.
Igual,
por favor, ahí viste los documentos, ¿no?
Acá justo los estoy viendo, 6 horas en el día y proyecto de resolución. Gracias, señores.
Así.
70 years ago, an inter-American dream and promise was enshrined in the OAS Charter. We can deliver on this promise. Our future leaders are counting on us.
Si llegan unos nuevos, es más fácil subirlos y de veras que sí. Buena idea, buen trabajo, Cecilio.
Sí, facilita mucho. Igual eran solo 8, ¿no? Hay veces que son...
Sí. No, claro, puede ser una lista grande y a veces, lo que te digo, llegan de último minuto.
Me and my kids have been there for over an year right now. And children are friends. It doesn't matter where they come from.
Nosotros estamos en una zona netamente selvática. La línea de adyacencia va desde el norte hasta el sur, va desde Modesto Méndez hasta Aguas Turbias, tanto en el norte como en el sur. Esta línea tiene 215 kilómetros de extensión.
De allí vino él, se buscó creo con los de la OEA y de allí vino el proyecto para acá, para Judá. Y fue que lo dieron el terreno, y lo dieron todo que era mano de obra y el material para hacer las casas que están ahorita. Y por ese motivo estamos aquí viviendo todavía.
La misión continúa trabajando en la implementación de medidas de fomento de la confianza mientras aguarda el resultado del reclamo que está atendiendo la Corte Internacional de Justicia por la disputa marítima, territorial e insular. Nuestra oficina en la zona adyacencia realiza verificaciones a solicitud de ambos gobiernos, facilita reuniones y patrullajes conjuntos entre las Fuerzas Armadas y promueve una cultura de paz y cooperación entre las comunidades locales.
Children will be children. And they have harmony. They don't see each other as a different country, but they see each other that they're growing together.
Con la ayuda financiera de la Unión Europea.
Esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
Cuando cambia Manicam no hay ningún problema. Cuando regreso al mensaje queda negro, entonces tengo que resolver el resto. Te digo que ahora que lo pongo, que la transición es contrario. Desgraciadamente.
More than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
Development cooperation has always been a priority for the OAS. The OAS SETI works with all member states to identify common challenges and find solutions through policy dialogue, which is transformed into action through technical cooperation initiatives. Policy dialogue is central to our work in development. The OAS SETI convenes development leaders in 11 ministerial meetings and high-level processes on priority areas such as competitiveness, labor, education, among others. Technical cooperation initiatives emerge from ongoing dialogue and are therefore established with built-in political support. All of our actions place people at the center, generating a multiplier effect in the region. We enhance human capacity by working with key stakeholders. This strengthens institutions, improving policies and programs, benefiting millions of people in the Americas. Our ability to deliver results relies on broad collaboration. Partnerships for Development, Cooperación Solidaria, is a unique OAS concept which recognizes that each member state, regardless of its size, wealth, or level of development, has value to share and can learn from others. This concept also includes close collaboration with other partners, amplifying our reach and impact. As we mark 70 years of work on development, we take a look back. This long evolution, driven by member states, has fine-tuned our unique model to support inter-American development. Today, all of our efforts fall into 5 strategic priorities: inclusive and competitive economies, sustainable development, education and human development, decent work for all, development cooperation, and partnerships. These are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals and the regional attainment of the 2030 Agenda. These priorities are also areas where the OAS SETI has extensive experience and proven impact. We have come a long way. But still have much work to do. "70 years ago, an inter-American dream and promise was enshrined in the OAS Charter. We can deliver on this promise. Our future leaders are counting on us."
Buenos días, Luis, ¿cómo está?
¿Cómo están, Ambassador?
Muy bien, gracias. Estoy tratando el sistema porque estoy en Canadá hoy.
Está perfecto. ¿Se le escucha bien? ¿Se le ve bien?
Ok, perfecto. Muchísimas gracias.
A usted.
Chao.
Chao, chao.
escuchas? Ok, apaga el micrófono.
Me and my kids have been there for over an year right now. And children are friends. It doesn't matter where they come from.
Buenos días.
Hola, Carmen.
¿Cómo estás, Carmen Lucía?
Muy bien, gracias. Bueno, mucha suerte y gracias por todo.
Señora Virna Ruiz, no sé si la probaste. Me representa.
No, probé al embajador Axel.
Guillermo, era gracias, perfecto, gracias. Apago.
Dime. Acá estoy con Guillermo porque ya podemos probar los muchachos. Vamos.
Nosotros estamos en una zona netamente selvática. La línea de adyacencia va desde el norte hasta el sur, va desde Modesto Méndez hasta Aguas Turbias, tanto en el norte como en el sur. Esta línea tiene 215 kilómetros de extensión.
Buenos días, Rosy, perfecto. Francis. Bonjour, Karin. Very well, thank you. Second
De allí vino él, se buscó creo con los de la OEA y de allí vino el proyecto para acá, para Judá. Y fue que lo dieron el terreno y lo dieron todo que era mano de obra y el material para hacer las casas que están ahorita. Y por ese motivo estamos aquí viviendo en Madrid.
La misión continúa trabajando en la implementación de medidas de fomento de la confianza mientras aguarda el resultado del reclamo que está atendiendo la Corte Internacional de Justicia por la disputa marítima, territorial e insular. Nuestra oficina en la zona de adyacencia realiza verificaciones de solicitud de ambos gobiernos, facilita reuniones y patrullajes conjuntos entre las Fuerzas Armadas y promueve una cultura de paz y cooperación entre las comunidades locales.
Children will be children, and they have harmony. They don't see each other as a different country, but they see each other that they're growing together.
Un abrazo grande y buen día. Ahí apago.
Regresamos al francés con Catherine. Aló, cabina francés. Ahí escucho ruido, pero no la voz. No sé si Guillermo o Steven están con ella.
No, esta segunda no.
Francés.
Guillermo que está lista la prueba, pero yo que no tenemos sonido.
Pero Guillermo está en francés, tratando de enseñar a Catherine. A ver, Catherine. 1, 2, 3, probando. Cabina francés.
Esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
Van a avisar por lo pronto hacia Estados Unidos.
Sí, hola, buenos días.
Buenos días, señor.
No se te escucha, José Luis.
Yo lo escucho. Rodrigo, yo lo escucho bien.
Ahora se me escucha, Rodrigo.
Ahora sí.
Ya. Sí, no, muchas gracias. Estamos esperando el deponente del embajador de China, que nos van a hacer unos minutos para todo este correcto.
Perfecto. Vamos a la prueba.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, señor. Ahora, señor González, podría release mic, que es el mismo botón así. Perfecto, gracias. Guatemala, lista, práctica operativa. Rodrigo, Guillermo nos avisa cuando probamos de nuevo con Catherine.
Dale.
More than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
Development cooperation has always been a priority for the OAS. The OAS SETI works with all member states to identify common challenges and define solutions through policy dialogue, which is transformed into action through technical cooperation initiatives. Policy dialogue is central to our work in development. The OAS SETI convenes development leaders in 11 ministerial meetings and high-level processes on priority areas such as competitiveness, labor, education, among others. Technical cooperation initiatives emerge from ongoing dialogue and are therefore established with built-in political support. All of our actions place people at the center, generating a multiplier effect in the region. We enhance human capacity by working with key stakeholders. This strengthens institutions, improving policies and programs, benefiting millions of people in the Americas. Our ability to deliver results relies on broad collaboration. Partnerships for Development, Cooperación Solidaria, is a unique OAS concept which recognizes that each member state, regardless of its size, wealth, or level of development, has value to share and can learn from others. This concept also includes close collaboration with other partners, amplifying our reach and impact. As we mark 70 years of work on development, we take a look back.
Solicitar la palabra para probar su micrófono y audio. Y imagen, perdón. Abajo a la derecha del botón azul, embajador. Ahí está. Embajador, ¿cómo le va?
Aló, hola, ¿qué tal? Buenos días.
Muy bien. Bien, embajador, bienvenido, gusto saludarlo.
Igualmente, acá todos vuelven, ¿no? Esto es terrible.
This long evolution, driven by member states, has fine-tuned our unique model to support inter-American development.
Gusto verlo, embajador, se le escucha y se le ve bien.
Sí, no hay problema, el volumen está adecuado.
El volumen está adecuado, embajador. Si usted tuviese auriculares, se le va a escuchar mejor, pero se le escucha bien, no se preocupe.
Today, all of our efforts fall into 5 strategic priorities: inclusive and competitive economies, sustainable development, education and human development, decent work for all, development cooperation, and partnerships. These are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals and the regional attainment of the 2030 Agenda. These priorities are also areas where the OAS SETI has extensive experience and proven impact.
Ahora el procedimiento es release mic. Ahí vas a quedar por fuera, o sea, sales de pantalla de micrófono y al dar que le des la palabra, vuelve y solicita la palabra y ahí volvemos y lo activamos desde acá. Después lo pronto acá fuera de pantalla, pero va a estar escuchando y viendo.
Perfecto, siempre que pide la palabra con el mismo botón.
Exactamente.
Ok, perfecto, señores. Muchísimas gracias. Un abrazo a las tres.
Un gusto, igual, muchas gracias.
Pierre Ponet, Haití.
Good morning.
Buen día, good morning.
Yes, you can see me, right?
Yeah, I cannot see you, sir.
There is a problem with my computer. I'm gonna have to change the device. I'm gonna have to go with my iPad. Yes, it's yesterday. It's been happening with the computer. I have to set it up. But I'm here. In other words, I probably will change the device. I will use another one.
If you need any technical support, we'll definitely contact you.
Okay.
But we'll wait for you to reconnect.
All right. Good morning, Esri. How are you?
We have come a long way.
Hey, Mr. Pierre, how are you doing? I'm fine. Thank you. So if you try again and if you still cannot connect, we'll get a solution to help you. Okay, thank you so much. Great. Oh, I will use a different one. Thank you.
Okay.
But still have much work to do.
Embajador Salinas.
70 years ago, an inter-American dream and promise was enshrined in the OAS Charter. We can deliver on this promise. Our future leaders are counting on us.
Perdón.
Buenos días, embajador. Bienvenido.
¿Cómo está? Pero no me está funcionando bien. Tiene que cortar automáticamente y me dejan ahí. ¿Entiendes? Ya estoy listo para que me hagan desaparecer.
Luis, si quieres prueba con el embajador Salinas. Está desconectado. Si quieres lo puedes.
Sí, porque no me estoy acá.
Ahí.
Ya, ahora sí.
Embajador Játiva del Ecuador.
Buenos días.
Embajador.
Buenos días, Néstor. Buenos días, Luis, Rodrigo.
Muy buen día. Sí,
Buenos días, gracias, Néstor. Un abrazo. Nos vemos más tarde.
Gracias, igualmente. Solo Rodrigo, voy a llamar al embajador de Chile, ¿no?
Sí, de acuerdo.
Me and my kids have been there for over an year right now. And children are friends. It doesn't matter where they come from.
Embajadora Lucia de Naval, México.
Buenos días, estamos aprobados.
Buenos días, Rodrigo.
Hello. Good to see you, sir.
Nosotros estamos en una zona netamente selvática. La línea de adyacencia va desde el norte hasta el sur, va desde Modesto Méndez hasta Aguas Turbias, tanto en el norte como en el sur. Esta línea tiene 215 kilómetros de extensión.
El audio entra y sale.
Ok, bueno, voy a tratar de conseguir el micrófono para conectarme y que tenga buena interferencia, porque la vez anterior cuando vine tuve bastantes problemas. Gracias, tomo notas, embajador. Buen día.
De allí vino él, se buscó creo con los de la OEA y de allí vino el proyecto para acá, para Judá. Y fue que lo dieron el terreno, y lo dieron todo que era mano de obra y el material para hacer las casas que están ahorita. Y por ese motivo estamos aquí viviendo todavía.
La misión continúa trabajando en la implementación de medidas de fomento de la confianza mientras aguarda el resultado del reclamo que está atendiendo la Corte Internacional de Justicia por la disputa marítima, territorial e insular. Nuestra oficina en la zona adyacencia realiza verificaciones a solicitud de ambos gobiernos, facilita reuniones y patrullajes conjuntos entre las Fuerzas Armadas y promueve una cultura de paz y cooperación entre las comunidades locales.
Children will be children, and they have harmony. They don't see each other as a different country, but they see each other that they're growing together.
Dr. Mendes, I need to check on the second booth of framing once again. Francis, Catherine.
Este video fue producido con la ayuda financiera de la Unión Europea.
Catherine. Veo que el micrófono está prendido, Catherine, pero no te escucho aún. ¿Aló? Ahora se apagó. Ahora se encendió. No te escucho, Catherine. Ya no sigue. La tuve una liga, pero no sé, sigue, no está
Hoy, esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
Embajador Cordero de Honduras.
Estimados amigos, saludarlos, embajador, siempre deseándole todo lo mejor al mismo deseado. Gracias.
Laura Frampton, con feliz.
Good morning. Good morning, SG. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Ms. Francis.
Good, thank you.
Chair of the Permanent Council.
Yes.
Good morning.
Madam Chair, if you're not getting the image, perhaps go under the special browser. Because that's happening with extra tours. Because we can hear you and we can see you clearly. So just follow that.
And I can hear
More than 100 years
If you
since
want
the
to refresh,
inauguration of this
we're
building, the
still
OAS
have time. You want to
headquarters,
refresh your browser? If
our
not, we can
institution
help you out.
still brings together
However
the
you want to
peoples
go.
of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
Embajador Externo González de Costa Rica.
Buenos días. Gracias.
Buen día.
Paredes. Colombia.
Perfecto. Muchas gracias.
Embajador
Chair, submit your camera.
Panamá, María Roquebert. Buenas.
Development cooperation has always been a priority for the OAS. The OAS SETI works with all member states to identify common challenges and define solutions through policy dialogue, which is transformed into action through technical cooperation initiatives. Policy dialogue is central to our work in development. The OAS SETI convenes development leaders in 11 ministerial meetings and high-level processes on priority areas such as competitiveness, labor, education, among others. Technical cooperation initiatives emerge from ongoing dialogue and are therefore established with built-in political support. All of our actions place people at the center, generating a multiplier effect in the region. We enhance human capacity by working with key stakeholders. This strengthens institutions, improving policies and programs, benefiting millions of people in the Americas. Our ability to deliver results relies on broad collaboration. Partnerships for Development, Cooperación Solidaria, is a unique OAS concept which recognizes that each member state, regardless of its size, wealth, or level of development, has value to share and can learn from others. This concept also includes close collaboration with other partners, amplifying our reach and impact. As we mark 70 years of work on development, we take a look back. This long evolution, driven by member states, has fine-tuned our unique model to support inter-American development. Today, all of our efforts fall into 5 strategic priorities: inclusive and competitive economies, sustainable development, education and human development, decent work for all, development cooperation, and partnerships. These are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals and the regional attainment of the 2030 Agenda. These priorities are also areas where the OAS SETI has extensive experience and proven impact.
Good morning, Assistant Secretary General. Do you have quorum?
Buenos días, señora presidenta. Con su permiso, voy a leer la lista de los países que están conectados y que han hecho las pruebas de video y audio. Terminamos con la fase de prueba y pasamos a la confirmación de quórum. Hasta ahora están conectados y han hecho las pruebas: Bahamas, Belice, Brasil, Canadá, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Ecuador, El Salvador, Guatemala, Guyana, Haití, Honduras, Jamaica, México, Panamá, Paraguay, Perú, Suriname y Venezuela. Tenemos quórum, señora presidenta. Gracias. Gracias, señor secretario general adjunto. Buenos días, señor secretario general, representantes permanentes, representantes alternos, señoras y señores. Quisiera inaugurar esta reunión extraordinaria del Consejo Permanente de conformidad con las disposiciones del artículo 14 del Estatuto del Consejo Permanente y el artículo 37 de su reglamento. Ambos disponen que el Consejo Permanente sea convocado por la Presidencia a petición de un representante. La reunión ha sido convocada a petición de las misiones permanentes de Brasil, Canadá, Colombia, Guatemala, Perú, Estados Unidos y Venezuela, como se indica en el documento CP/INF 8821/20.
Republic of Venezuela. We move to item 1, the adoption of the draft order of business. Pursuant to the provisions of Article 43 of the Rules of Procedure of the Permanent Council, we shall proceed to adopt the order of business for this meeting as contained in CP/OD-2309/20. The order of business is submitted for consideration. If there is no opposition or comments, the draft order of business is adopted. We shall now proceed to the second item on the order of business and consider the draft resolution, rejection of the parliamentary elections held on December 6th in Venezuela, contained in document CP/Doc 680, and as presented by the Permanent Mission of Brazil and co-sponsored by the delegations of Canada, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, United States, Guatemala, Paraguay, Peru, Uruguay, and Venezuela. I offer the floor first to the Permanent Mission of Brazil for the presentation of the draft resolution and to member states listed as co-sponsors.
Muito obrigado, senhora presidente. Bom dia.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning to the Secretary General and Assistant Secretary General. At the outset, I would like to, on behalf of my delegation and the co-sponsors, thank Your Excellency for convening this special session of the Permanent Council. I would like to present the main ideas of the draft resolution entitled Rejection of the Parliamentary Elections held on December 6th in Venezuela. This was circulated to all delegations yesterday morning, and this is co-sponsored by, in addition to Brazil, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, United States, Guatemala, Paraguay, Peru, Uruguay, and Venezuela. The draft we are considering intends to give the OAS a single voice added to those of so many others around the world rejecting the fraudulent elections that were held on December 6th last in Venezuela. In the preambular section, it reiterates Sunday's fraudulent elections, which were run by the illegitimate Nicolas Maduro regime with the only aim of eliminating the sole remaining legitimate and democratically elected institution in Venezuela. And against this backdrop, we are seriously concerned with the process of destroying democracy and the rule of law in Venezuela, worsening the political, economic, social, humanitarian, human rights, and security crises in the country. The preambular section of the draft resolution concludes with expressing support for Venezuelan civil society, which is planning on holding a broad consultation to examine the future of Venezuela. Chair, in the operative section, the draft resolution rejects the fraudulent elections held on Sunday and does not recognize their results, as they were neither free nor fair in accordance with the conditions established by international law. They lacked impartiality and transparency and did not have participation of all political actors and citizens. Political prisoners were not released, and there is a lack of independence in the electoral authority. There also was no independent, credible international electoral observation. The draft, in the strongest terms, condemns the deliberate and consistent strategy of the illegitimate Nicolas Maduro regime to undermine the democratic system and the separation of powers by the installation of non-democratically elected entities as the result of fraudulent elections, and this strategy consolidates Venezuela as a dictatorship. In addition to this, the text then looks at elements from previous resolutions adopted by the GA as well as the Permanent Council, and that includes guarantee the security of members of the National Assembly, immediate release of political prisoners, calling for free, fair, transparent, and legitimate elections to be held in Venezuela with international electoral observers that are trustworthy and credible. And finally, urging full access in order to allow humanitarian assistance for the vulnerable sectors of Venezuela's society. Chair, once again, I would like to thank you for allowing me to make this brief presentation of the draft resolution. Once it is approved by the Council I hope it is soon approved by the Council with as many votes as possible. We trust that our response to the fraudulent elections will be an example that is up to the commitments and values that we all shoulder as members of the Organization of American States. Thank you very much, Chair.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry, you're on mute.
Distinguished representative of Brazil, and will now recognize the distinguished representative of Guatemala.
Thank you very much, Chair. Guatemala would like to ask that we submit the draft resolution presented by Brazil to a vote. Thank you very much, Chair.
We thank the distinguished representative of Guatemala and will now put the resolution to a vote. According to Article 57 of the Rules of Procedure, the decisions of the Permanent Council shall be taken by the vote of an absolute majority of its members. Therefore, we shall proceed to a vote to see whether delegations approve or do not approve the draft resolution being considered by the Permanent Council. The Chair respectfully reminds delegations that under Article 58 of the Rules of Procedure of the Permanent Council, call-in votes, the name of each member state shall be called, and the representative shall cast his or her vote in favor, yes, in opposition, no, or abstain. Chair suggests that the vote be by roll call. The elections shall proceed in that manner. The Chair also wishes to remind the distinguished delegations that once the voting has begun, no representative may interrupt it, except for a point of order relating to the manner in which it is being conducted. I have put all our member states in this drawer, and We will proceed in order of precedence by lot, and the voting will begin with the country is now selected. And the country that is to start the voting process is Canada. And the question remains very straightforward. Do you or do you not approve the draft resolution submitted for consideration? The answer is yes, no, or abstain. We'll now offer the floor to the distinguished representative of, or the delegation of Canada.
Good morning, Madam President. The answer for Canada is yes.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, you're on mute.
I had offered the floor to the representative of Canada.
And he has voted in favor.
Oh, I did not hear.
I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
He has voted in favor. You're on mute again, Madam Chair.
Ambassador Mendez, I think the chair's video froze. There might be an issue with connectivity.
While we get help to the distinguished chair, can we try to connect the Ambassador of the Bahamas, the Vice Chair, please?
Good morning, SG, ASG, distinguished colleagues. I am moving between two meetings. I'm in a meeting with UNESCO and the World Forum on Freedom of the Press. But I'm here, and I heard the chair establish the order of precedent, beginning with Canada, and Canada has voted. And I believe the next person in line, next delegation in line, I don't have the delegation list in front of me.
It's Chile. Chile, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Chile. You have the floor.
Chile votes in favor.
Okay. Thank you, Chile. Colombia.
Colombia votes in favor.
Thank you, Colombia. Your vote is recorded. Costa Rica.
Costa Rica is in favor.
Thank you, Costa Rica. We have your vote. The next delegation in line, please.
Dominica, Mr. Chair.
The Dominican Republic.
No, Dominica.
Dominica. Dominica, you have the floor.
Dominica, me confirmo técnico si Dominica está conectado, por favor.
Can the technicians please confirm that Dominica is connected? They are connected.
Because the order is established, I don't want to skip Dominica.
Dominica is absent.
Dominica is absent. So we now go to the delegation that's Pierre.
Ambassador Colley, the chair is back. I don't know if she wants
You have the floor.
to take over again.
Thank you, Assistant Secretary General. Thank you, Deputy Chair Ambassador Colley. Are we now at the delegation of Ecuador?
Yes, Ecuador is next, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Ecuador is in favor. Ecuador is in favor.
It's on the delegation of Ecuador. We now recognize El Salvador.
El Salvador, please request the floor. El Salvador is recognized, please. El Salvador is in favor.
Salvador, and now recognize the delegation of the United States.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The United States is in favor.
We thank the delegation of the United States and now recognize the delegation of Grenada.
Por favor, nos confirma un técnico si tenemos a Grenada.
Will the technicians please confirm whether Grenada is present? Yes, Ambassador.
No lo veo en sala.
I don't see Grenada.
Grenada is absent. We now move to the delegation of Guatemala. Guatemala is recognized. You have
Guatemala is in favor.
We thank the delegation of Guatemala and now recognize the delegation of Guyana.
In favor.
We thank the delegation of Guyana and now recognize the delegation of Haiti.
Haiti is in favor.
We thank the delegation of Haiti and now recognize the delegation of Honduras.
Está a favor.
Honduras is in favor.
We thank the delegation of Honduras and now recognize the delegation of Jamaica.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The delegation of Jamaica supports the resolution.
We thank the delegation.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, I didn't hear the vote by Jamaica. I'm sorry. Jamaica, can you please repeat your vote? I'm very sorry, I didn't hear you.
Jamaica votes in favor.
Can you still hear Ambassador Mendes?
I didn't hear the vote by Jamaica. Sorry.
He said in favor. Maybe can you refresh your browser for a second and come back in, because if you're not hearing, the delegations, it could be as simple as that. Jamaica is requesting the floor again.
No, I'm just requesting in the context of the Ambassador ASG not here, having heard my vote. So I'm just wondering if it's okay for me to release the mic.
Yes, sir. You recorded as voted in favor. Thank you.
The delegation of Jamaica, we thank the delegation of Jamaica and now recognize the delegation of Mexico.
Good morning. Mexico votes against the resolution.
We thank the delegation of Mexico and now recognize the delegation of Nicaragua.
Can the technician please confirm that someone from Nicaragua is connected right now? I'm checking, Ambassador. Nicaragua is absent.
Nicaragua is absent. We now recognize the delegation of Panama.
Good morning, Chair. Panama is in favor.
We thank the delegation of Panama and now recognize the delegation of Paraguay.
Paraguay is in favor.
Paraguay and now recognize the delegation of Peru.
Good morning, Chair. Mr. Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, Peru is in favor.
We thank the delegation of Peru and will now recognize the delegation of the Dominican Republic.
Good morning. Thank you very much. The DR is in favor.
We thank the delegation of the DR and recognize St. Kitts, delegation of St. Kitts and Nevis. Can we ask if St. Kitts and Nevis is present?
Yeah, there's a point of order from Everson Hall.
We recognize
that is the ambassador of St. Kitts and Nevis, Madam Chair.
Okay, we recognize the ambassador of St. Kitts and Nevis, Ambassador Hall, on a point of order.
Abstain.
St. Kitts and Nevis has voted to abstain, not a point of order. Confirming with the ASG, is that what you heard, Assistant Secretary General?
Ambassador Hall, can you please repeat your vote?
Yes, the vote for St. Kitts and Nevis is to abstain.
Thank you.
We thank the delegation of St. Kitts and Nevis and now recognize the delegation of St. Lucia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. St. Lucia votes in favor of the resolution. Thank you.
We thank the delegation of St. Lucia and now recognize the delegation of St. Vincent and Grenadines. St. Vincent and the Grenadines, you have the floor.
Can a technician confirm if we have St. Vincent and the Grenadines connected?
St. Vincent is absent, Ambassador.
St. Vincent and the Grenadines is absent, and we now recognize the delegation of Suriname. Can the technician also check if Suriname is present?
They just requested the floor, Madam Chair. Suriname, can you ask for the floor again, please?
They're in, Ambassador. It's taken a while for them to appear on the screen.
Yeah.
The delegation of Suriname abstains.
We thank the delegation of Suriname and recognize the delegation of Trinidad and Tobago.
Madam Chair, Trinidad and Tobago is absent.
Absent. Trinidad and Tobago is absent. We now recognize the delegation of Uruguay.
Uruguay.
That
no.
Uruguay just came in.
Yeah, they're requesting the floor.
We now recognize the delegation of Uruguay.
A very good morning, distinguished Chair, Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General. Greetings to all. Uruguay is never absent. That's my first point. And the second is that I vote in favor.
Is acknowledged and your vote is noted. We now move to the delegation of Venezuela.
Venezuela votes in favor, Madam Chair. Thank you.
We thank the delegation of Venezuela. We will now await the count of the vote.
Madam Chair, excuse me, Madam Chair. You still have the rest of delegations from Antigua and Barbuda, Argentina.
Oh yes, yes. We will now recognize the delegation of Antigua and Barbuda.
They wrote formally to indicate they would not participate in this meeting, Madam Chair, so they're absent.
We know that the delegation of Antigua and Barbuda is absent, and now recognize the delegation of Argentina.
Connected.
Yes, Argentina is connected.
Embajador Raimundi, ¿puede pedir la palabra, por favor? Estoy viendo su...
Ambassador Raimundi, please request the floor again. I just saw your message to say that you could not connect. Please request the connection again, if you please. We're ready to give you the floor. We have offered the floor to the ambassador. Still awaiting his taking it. That's the interpreter. Argentina has the floor. He did accept Ambassador Mendez, and we have him on the list as having accepted the floor, but he's still waiting to come in.
We solved Argentina's technical issues.
Ambassador Mendez, would you like to try if Ambassador of Argentina requests the floor again?
Embajador de Argentina, ¿puede solicitar la palabra nuevamente, por favor?
This is Ambassador Mendez addressing the ambassador for Argentina. Could you please request the floor again, Argentina?
Madam Chair, would you consider continuing with the Bahamas while we get a technician to help the ambassador of Argentina?
Yes, thank you for that recommendation, Assistant Secretary General, and we'll now recognize the delegation of Bahamas.
Bahamas, you have the floor.
Bahamas was recognized. It appears it takes time to come into screen.
Bahamas, you have the floor, please.
Ambassador Mendez, Ambassador Coley was recognized and given the floor. It's taking a while to come in. Now he released the mic.
So to continue with the recommendation.
Bahamas is connected now.
Oh, Bahamas, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Bahamas votes in favor.
The delegation of Bahamas, we thank the delegation of Bahamas for their vote, and now we'll recognize the delegation of Barbados.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, Argentina is connected now.
Oh, Argentina is connected. We now offer the floor to the delegation of Argentina.
It's not connected anymore. Argentina is in and out. It was, hopefully they will come in now. They were given the floor.
Ahora sí.
Recognize the delegation of Argentina.
I think we've got it, Madam Chair, this time, says the ambassador. Ahora sí. Right. I'm here. You may not see me, but I hope you can hear me. That's already a start. Good. Argentina abstains, Madam Chair.
We thank the delegation of Argentina and now recognize the delegation of Barbados.
Good morning. The delegation of Barbados abstains.
We thank the delegation of Barbados and will now recognize the delegation of Belize.
Good morning. Belize abstains.
We thank the delegation of Belize and now recognize the delegation of Bolivia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bolivia votes against.
We thank the delegation of Bolivia, now recognize the delegation of Brazil.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Brazil votes in favor.
Assistant Secretary General, can we confirm that all the member states that are present have now voted?
Yes, Madam Chair, and if you just give me one moment, we'll give you the results of the tally.
Okay, thank you, Assistant Secretary General.
Madam Chair, the results of the voting are as follows. In favor of the resolution 21, against the resolution 2, there were 5 abstentions, and there are 6 delegations that are absent. Thank you, Madam Chair.
With a vote of 21 yes, 2 no, 5 abstentions, and 6 absence, the Permanent Council hereby declares the draft resolution contained in document CP/5667/20 approved. There being no we now recognize the delegation of Brazil to have the floor. Brazil, the distinguished representative of Brazil, you have the floor.
Muito obrigado, senhora presidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The 55th General Assembly of the OAS, which was held fewer than 50 days ago, was abundantly clear in adopting resolution entitled Lack of Minimum Democratic Conditions to Hold Fair, Free, and Transparent Elections in the Republic of Venezuela. Now, given the criminal and dictatorial nature of the illegitimate regime that heads up Venezuela, it was not surprising, therefore, to see Nicolás Maduro eager to consummate the fraud that had begun to be perpetrated months ago. And as we saw this week, this sham election that was held December 6th in Venezuela lacked any kind of legitimacy. It was held without the minimum guarantee of any democratic process. They certainly were not free. They were not secure. They were not transparent. The integrity of the electoral process itself was corrupted. There were no full participation of all political parties, nor professional and reliable international observers. The electoral sham, I say, this fantasy of Mr. Maduro's, can only be described as a farce. The Venezuelan people were barred from having electoral representation in their parliament. Now, despite all of that, the very high rate of abstention that was noted on the 6th of December is in and of itself, we believe, a victory for the Venezuelan people, because there you have a very clear exercise of civil disobedience and a loud and clear position against the dictatorship that is still holding the country in its iron grip. The Venezuelan people could not have spoken more clearly nor more eloquently to the world in exposing the autocratic and illegitimate nature of the regime that they live under. That regime did not previously have any vestige of democratic legitimacy in any event. Besides not being able to be recognized, these events of December 6th, we believe, should be seen for what they are. That is a clarion call to all democratic countries in the hemisphere and the world to marshal their forces together to assist the country to recover democracy, respect for human rights, and a reinstatement of genuine democracy in that country. A regime that arrests and tortures its opponents cannot possibly be met with silence on the part of the international community. That in itself would be yet another instance of fraud and complicity, we would believe. And beyond this, besides this being, we think, I say again, a clarion call to the democratic world of this hemisphere to rally round the country, we believe the time has come to do what we can to stop the intrigue and the ongoing blockage to that country, ever celebrating, and we hope it will be soon, free, fair, and transparent elections. And certainly Brazil will be heading the list in that effort. Thank you.
We thank the delegation of Brazil and now recognize the delegation of Chile.
Madam Chair, yet again, the Permanent Council is meeting to broach the situation in Venezuela. We must recognize this with regret. Yet again, we are seeing that conditions in that country have deteriorated still more. The elections held last December 6th to renew the National Assembly has been met, certainly not with a free, fair, and transparent election with proper international supervision. And for that reason, those important elements being lacking, Chile again stands resolutely against them. As the Foreign Minister, Mr. Lamar, has already stated for my country, those conditions in Venezuela were nothing but an exercise and the affirmation of dictatorship, nothing to do with the advancement of democracy. I quote him. Chile again expresses its resolute support for the resistance in Venezuela and all movements to find a peaceful and lasting solution to the crisis in Venezuela, which is constitutional and indeed humanitarian. Madam Chair, to that end, Chile will continue moving forward and calling out to the international community to keep our heads together and to stand resolute in favor of a recovery of democracy in Venezuela. For that, of course, there have to be free, just, and credible elections for presidency and for the parliament of that country. Yet again, the government of Chile, therefore, reaffirms its support for the reestablishment of democracy, the promotion and protection of human rights, and the rule of law in Venezuela. We will continue working unstintingly to that end. Thank you.
We thank the delegation of Chile and now recognize the delegation of the Dominican Republic.
Madam Chair, Costa Rica is first.
Oh,
Costa Rica ha expresado.
Madam Chair, Costa Rica, along with numbers of states in this hemisphere, has already spoken out with regard to the December 6th elections for the National Assembly in Venezuela, headed up by the illegitimate regime led by Maduro in that country. These elections were indeed illegitimate, not transparent, therefore not democratic, because none of the essential ingredients to those ends were ever brought forward. And so we call them fraudulent, and we support such efforts as go in the direction of the recovery of democracy, respect for human rights, and the rule of law in Venezuela. When we voted in favor of the resolution before us this morning, Madam Chair, Costa Rica would like to add that we do not necessarily support every single phrase that has ever been adopted in resolutions to that end in the OAS. We do believe that the legislative body and other bodies in Venezuela might have some elements in favor. So we are not here in voting for this resolution for or against any particular modalities that might yet be found in Venezuela. We will be keeping our eye on the situation with great concern and great interest. We believe, as so many do on many sides of the divide, the political divide in Venezuela, that it's important that we remember as we do this to put the interests of Venezuela, capital V, above all else in our effort to help that country return to democracy. And that struggle, Madam Chair, supported by us, has yet to be supported and must be fully supported and respected as the free, fair, and elections that the country needs to hold as soon as possible are supported by the Venezuelan people themselves. Thank you.
We thank the delegation of Costa Rica and now recognize the delegation of Dominican Republic.
Madam Chair, the Dominican Republic very greatly regrets that yet another opportunity has been missed to celebrate a genuine, free, fair, and transparent electoral process. We would all have applauded, but the necessary conditions to that end were simply not gathered, not within the political arena, nor among the citizenship as large. And impartial observers would have confirmed as much. The rejection, therefore, that is patent in this resolution of the sham electoral process in Venezuela is something that we have supported. But that doesn't mean, of course, that the actual political forces themselves must not continue to come forward. We would call on all international parties to continue lending their support to Venezuela as that country fights for the respect and promotion of human rights, particularly given the extraordinarily precarious situation the country is in so many respects. We also underscore the collective will expressed here that the Venezuelan society can only come together yet again through dialogue, negotiation, and ongoing consultation with the citizenship itself as they determine fit. Thank you.
We thank the delegation of Dominican Republic and now recognize the delegation of Canada.
Madam Chair, as we adopt this resolution today, the Maduro dictatorship has tightened its grip on Venezuela's institutions. The people of Venezuela continue to live in a country absent of democracy. They're ruled by a regime unwilling and unable to provide the basic necessities for life, and one that commits crimes against humanity against all who dissent in order to maintain its grip on power. Now more than ever, we must recall the solemn commitment that all of our governments made when the Inter-American Democratic Charter was signed nearly 20 years ago, affirming that the peoples of the Americas have a right to democracy, and their governments have an obligation to promote and to defend it. Madame la Présidente, il est important que nous rejetions le processus.
Madam Chair, it is most important that we stand together to reject this fraudulent process held last Sunday. But it is equally important that within the OAS we garner the greatest and the most resolute support possible to Venezuela, not only in this hemisphere, but in the world at large. In future, we must continue to work together, but redouble our efforts in the context of serious and credible negotiations, with the hope that we may assist in reinstituting the democratic and constitutional order in that country, wherein parliamentary elections would be free and credible. Thank you.
Canada, and now recognize the delegation of Ecuador.
Ecuador would like to once again and strongly reiterate our strong rejection and concern with the Venezuelan crisis and its many dimensions. The systematic violation of human rights and basic freedoms in that country due to the actions of the illegitimate Maduro regime. The decision of the Caracas authorities to hold parliamentary elections on December 6th did not meet the most basic guarantees for a free, fair, inclusive, or democratic process. Our government does not recognize the results, which are in violation of the Constitution, are completely illegal, and have the only goal of seeking to destroy the last remaining democratically elected institution of Venezuela. My country, along with members of the Lima Group and others, and those who are part of the International Contact Group, condemn the elections held last Sunday, which do not comply with any international standards or national legislation which is required for elections in Venezuela. They are not representative in any way of the will of the Venezuelan people who have been beset by unemployment and hunger. The Ecuadorian government reiterates its solidarity and support for the democratic forces and the Venezuelan opposition seeking a strong, lasting political resolve to the very resolution to the very serious crisis, which has exposed millions of Venezuelans to exile, particularly those who have fled to our countries. We call on international actors to work to restore the democratic system, and we reiterate our position that the only sustainable solution to overcome the crisis caused by the illegitimate Maduro regime, which has worsened conditions on the ground even more, is to find a peaceful, democratic political solution through presidential elections that are free and fair, in line with the most basic requirements of universality, freedom, and fairness. That was not the case on Sunday. We need to promote representative democracy in Venezuela as the only way to guarantee rights of Venezuelan people. Today, more than ever, this is the case. Thank you very much.
We thank the delegation of Ecuador and now recognize the delegation of Panama.
Gracias, señora presidenta. El gobierno
Chair, my government would like to specify that our vote in favor of the draft resolution on the parliamentary elections in Venezuela held on December 6, 2020, and the lack of conditions for the electoral process to include participation of all political stakeholders and citizens does not recognize the continuing of the legislative body or its members. We will continue to support those who are seeking a negotiated, peaceful resolution that is consensual and lasting in the face of the very serious crisis faced by Venezuela. Thank you very much, Chair.
Delegation of Panama, and now recognize the delegation of Jamaica.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, my delegation is requesting the addition of the following text as a footnote to the resolution just adopted. And I quote, "The government of Jamaica remains deeply concerned with the ongoing developments in Venezuela. And indeed, we are particularly concerned about the well-being of the people in that country. In keeping with the principles noted in the recent resolution adopted by the General Assembly on the 21st of October 2020, we believe the lead up to the elections held in Venezuela on the 6th of December 2020 lacked the necessary conditions established in international law to be determined as the free exercise of a democratic process. Jamaica believes that the OAS has an important role to play in promoting peace and security in the hemisphere through an inclusive process, in keeping with the rule and procedures of the organization. We are also of the view that there is need for a careful legal assessment by the OAS of what has unfolded following the elections held on the 6th of December 2020, including the legal implications of the context, within the context of the OAS." End of quote. Madam Chair, the text will be sent to the Secretariat as quickly as possible. Thank you.
We thank the delegation of Jamaica, and the request for the footnote is noted, and I see noted by the Assistant Secretary General. We now recognize the delegation of Paraguay.
Thank you, Chair, Mr. Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, dear colleagues. We are facing one more attempt by Maduro's usurping regime, this time turning to elections for the National Assembly in Venezuela without the most basic guarantees for any democratic process, without the freedom, transparency, or security that is required, and without participation from all political stakeholders or international observance. That is why we support the text that was presented today to this council, rejecting the fraudulent elections held on December 6th last in Venezuela. We urge at the same time that the international community support the efforts to restore democracy and respect for human rights, as well as the rule of law in this brotherly nation. The OAS and its member states must continue to insist and raise our voices constantly, urging that we prevent Maduro from consolidating an unprecedented dictatorship. This is even more important in the context of a pandemic. We must be supporting and not simply give words on behalf of Venezuelan people. We need to urge parliamentary and presidential elections that are free, fair, credible, and this needs to be done as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Madam Chair, you're on mute. Sorry.
Thank you. We thank the delegation of Paraguay and now recognize the delegation of the United States.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for convening this special permanent council meeting, which reaffirms the OAS stance in support of a return to democracy in Venezuela. It's important for the OAS and the world to recognize the fraudulent December 6 elections as the latest act in the playbook of the Maduro regime to undermine and ultimately destroy democracy in Venezuela. The Maduro regime has already subverted democracy and violated the Venezuelan constitution through the fraudulent 2018 presidential elections, unconstitutional packing of the National Electoral Authority, and partisan control of the Venezuelan Supreme Court and legal system. The last democratic election in Venezuela was in 2015, when the Venezuelan people overwhelmingly rejected Maduro and voted for opposition control of the National Assembly. Since then, the Maduro regime has smothered the opposition's constitutional authority, creating a rival and illegitimate constituent assembly filled with Maduro loyalists. And with the Supreme Court restricting the powers of the National Assembly, the police arresting its deputies, and the regime prohibiting access to the National Assembly chambers. Maduro has nearly destroyed a once prosperous country. The economy is in free fall, and with hyperinflation that has resulted in a month's wages barely covering one day's worth of food. The coronavirus is ravaging the country, with the healthcare system nearing collapse. Over 5 million Venezuelans, roughly the number that voted in these so-called elections, have fled the country. The people who remain are desperate, and the Maduro regime preys on their desperation, allocating meager public assistance and food assistance to those who support and vote for the regime. Madam Chair, the OAS and the majority of its member states can be proud of the stance they have taken to support democracy in Venezuela. Member states condemned the 2018 presidential election. We seated the representatives of the opposition National Assembly as the true democratic voice of the Venezuelan people. We repeatedly denounced the grave human rights violations of the Maduro regime, supporting the right to peaceful protest, and condemning the practices of arbitrary arrest, including of opposition members of the National Assembly. We have repeatedly called for the release of political prisoners. In the 2020 OAS General Assembly, we denounced the Maduro regime for undermining Venezuela's democratic system. We insisted that the planned National Assembly elections include all political actors and citizens, the release of political prisoners, and legitimate international electoral observation. None of these came to pass. We welcome the United Nations independent fact-finding report that identified massive human rights violations and called for ending the use of excessive force, extrajudicial executions, forced disappearances, arbitrary detention, and torture. We called on the Maduro regime to allow the delivery of desperately needed humanitarian assistance. And finally, we urged free and fair presidential elections so the people of Venezuela could finally choose their own leaders. Now that the Maduro regime has carried out its fraudulent elections, we are pleased that the OAS is upholding the principles of the Democratic Charter and standing firmly for the restoration of democracy in Venezuela. We have just approved a strong resolution. And with this resolution, the OAS joins the Lima Group, the European Union, and the International Contact Group, as well as over 50 countries worldwide, to reject this election farce. Today, we have been called upon to take a stand for democracy, and we have done so. The United States recognizes that the next months will be very difficult for the Venezuelan people. The illegitimate Maduro regime has done tremendous damage to this proud and once prosperous country, damage that will take many years to repair. We firmly believe that true democracy, with free and fair presidential elections, is the only path forward. Many countries and intermediaries have tried to negotiate with the Maduro regime, urging it to stop its authoritarian actions and put an end to their failed political and economic policies. None of these have had success, and Venezuela remains on the same downward trajectory. The international community cannot allow Maduro, who is in power illegitimately because he stole the 2018 elections, to gain from stealing a second election. We therefore urge all countries committed to democracy to join us in supporting the legitimate National Assembly and the interim president moving forward. Neither Maduro nor a new fraudulently elected National Assembly will represent the legitimate voice of the Venezuelan people, which must be expressed through free and fair elections. Thank you, Madam Chair.
We thank the delegation of the United States and now recognize the delegation of El Salvador.
Thank you very much, Chair. El Salvador calls for a restoration of institutional democracy and rule of law in Venezuela, and we do not recognize the elections held by the illegitimate regime of Nicolas Maduro. They did not comply with international standards for democratic processes, and they did not include the participation of all political stakeholders. We also reiterate that it is only by holding free, fair, and transparent elections that guarantee the freedom of citizens in line with the Venezuelan constitution that we will be able to end the economic, political, humanitarian crisis faced by the people of Venezuela. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Chair. With the recently approved resolution by the Council added to the resolution adopted by the GA on October 21st, my delegation reiterates that we need to show that we are not indifferent to the crisis underway in Venezuela and that we condemn in the strongest terms the consistent, deliberate strategy of the illegitimate Maduro regime to undermine the democratic system and consolidate powers in Venezuela. by the creation of a non-democratic entity and holding fraudulent elections on December 6th. Colombia, like many other countries and groups of countries, does not recognize the results of the fraudulent elections held on December 6th and promoted by the illegitimate Maduro regime without guarantees of impartiality, freedom, equal opportunity, justice, or transparency in a democratic system. Without that, we cannot recognize the legitimacy of elections that were held without any electoral authority that was independent, neutral, or transparent, and without the participation of all political stakeholders, particularly the democratic opposition that is persecuted by the regime, and without any objective electoral observations. With this farce of an election, the dictatorial regime of Nicolas Maduro is seeking to extend its undermining of power and control over the National Assembly. This was the last democratic solution standing in Venezuela, and Colombia reiterates that it is only through parliamentary and presidential elections that are free, credible, and fair that we will be able to pave the way toward democracy and overcoming the multidimensional crisis that has beset Venezuela. We will continue to support the 4 pillars promoted by Juan Guaido and many other countries, that is an end of usurpation, transition, government with broad participation, activating a reconstruction plan, and convening free elections. Chair, we are concerned with the physical safety of members of the legitimate National Assembly, and we condemn these statements threatening future reprisals against them by the Maduro regime. We reiterate our call toward the international community for us to avoid running the risk of indifference, and for the various multilateral and regional fora and international legal instances to support the Venezuelan people in their fight for justice in the face of flagrant crimes against humanity and injustice. This has been documented in many different reports, as noted in the report on the International Independent Observer on the facts in Venezuela, the IACHR, and the report from the Special Advisor to the Secretary General on the responsibility to protect. This was published just last week. To conclude, we would like to express our solidarity with the people of Venezuela. Their right to democracy has once again been denied by the illegitimate regime, which is holding on to power by any means possible. The crimes against humanity and electoral fraud constitute transnational crimes, as for some time this has presented the greatest risk to regional stability. Colombia urges the international community to redouble its efforts within the framework of international law and the mechanisms and principles of the inter-American system to support the people of Venezuela in their expectations to restore the rule of law and democracy in their country. Thank you very much.
We thank the delegation of Colombia and now recognize the delegation of Guatemala.
Thank you very much, Chair. My delegation has supported and been very concerned with the very serious humanitarian crisis in Venezuela, which began in 2018 when Nicolas Maduro stole the elections, and this led to a series of events which have progressively deteriorated democracy in Venezuela. This situation affects the entire region because these are our brothers and sisters from Venezuela who suffer day in and day out from the crisis of this crisis. Guatemala has expressed its ongoing concern due to the many violations at the hands of the illegitimate Maduro regime, which continue to be perpetrated against the human rights of the Venezuelan people. And we cannot sit by idly in the face of this unfortunate situation, which has been noted by the Human Rights Council at the United Nations, as well as the ISCHR. We are keeping in mind that representative democracy is necessary for stability, peace, and development in the region. Therefore, Guatemala in 2020 echoed the urgent appeal to restore democracy in Venezuela through free, fair, credible elections. Unfortunately, and as we have seen since the convening of parliamentary elections, the legitimacy and legality were completely absent from the December 6th elections, which were fraudulent and far from any minimum standard for credibility, and through which Maduro attacked the last standing democratic institution in that country, that is the National Assembly. These elections did not have legitimacy or legality, nor the minimum guarantees for any free, safe, transparent democratic process, or the integrity of votes or participation from all political stakeholders or even international observations. This all undermined the last democratic institution in Venezuela. We must work to restore democracy through parliamentary and presidential elections that are free, fair, and credible, and impartial, through an independent national electoral authority and independent impartial Supreme Court. There was no support from international observers that could bear witness to the credibility of this process, and there was no independent process. Political prisoners were not freed, and this was the result of concerted fraud. Both the opposition and the citizens should have the right to say no to this farce of democracy that is presented by the Maduro regime. And the people of Venezuela have spoken very loudly by not participating in these elections in large numbers. This has been one more step on the path toward consolidating the dictatorship in that country and undermining the rule of law. This is in violation of the OAS Charter, the Inter-American Declaration on Human Rights, and any international instrument that promotes the rule of law. Chair, keeping in mind that the people of the Americas have the right to democracy as well as the government's obligation to protect them, Guatemala has echoed countries that have submitted this draft resolution for consideration, rejecting the parliamentary elections held in December on December 6, 2020, adopted today. Therefore, Guatemala reiterates its appeal that we support a transition process to a democratic government as soon holding presidential elections and parliamentary elections that are transparent, legitimate, and credible as soon as possible with the presence of international observers, and above all, that this be a process in which the people of Venezuela are those who have their voices heard. The international community needs to provide assistance to the most vulnerable swaths of Venezuelan society that have been affected by the crisis. This is pursuant to the humanitarian principles and international law. Guatemala reiterates its support and solidarity with the brotherly people of Venezuela. We reiterate our commitment to democracy in the hemisphere, and we call on the international community to continue its efforts working toward a peaceful constitutional solution to the current crisis in that country. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. We thank the delegation of Guatemala and now recognize the delegation of Peru. We welcome back to the prominent
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm delighted to greet you and thank you very much for your welcome words. Peru has decided to co-sponsor the resolution that this Permanent Council just approved, as it is indispensable for the voice of the OAS to join the many unanimous voices around the world rejecting the events in Venezuela on this last December 6th. What occurred was the consolidation of the dictatorship in that country. These elections had none of the most basic guarantees in order to be considered democratic. And this electoral process has been rejected unanimously. In Peru, we have also rejected the elections. They are completely invalid and unworthy of being considered as such. We strongly urge diplomatic efforts to restore democracy and the rule of law in Venezuela. This is part of the path that we must continue to staunchly confirm when promoting democracy in that brotherly country. We will continue to work hand in hand with the international community in order to ensure that Venezuela restores its democracy and rule of law with respect for human rights of the Venezuelan people, and that we find a constitutional and peaceful way out of this quagmire. We call on all democratic stakeholders in Venezuela to prioritize working hand in hand with our friendly countries that are part of the Lima Group. We believe that we must join forces and commit ourselves to a transition process that is defined and driven by Venezuelan people and concludes in free, fair, and credible presidential elections as soon as possible, because that is the true solution to the unfortunate crisis that we are seeing play out in Venezuela. Thank you very much.
We thank the delegation of Peru and will now recognize the delegation of Argentina.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The Republic of Argentina reaffirms its commitment to dialogue amongst all actors seeking a peaceful political solution to the critical situation that exists in Venezuela. We reiterate our position with regard to the importance of the electoral urns to effectively renew the institutions in Venezuela and to grasp genuine and full democracy, such that not only the Venezuelan economy, but most importantly, the welfare of the Venezuelan people may be restored. Argentina is absolutely convinced that this cannot be done from abroad. What especially cannot be hoped for from abroad is to somehow supplant the external position to those who participated in the elections without contributing thereto, and even worse, backing one group against another. The present assembly called for elections on the 5th, will take its position on the 5th of January, because that's what the Venezuelan texts say. And so a government of transition, if that is what some consider it to be, would in effect be somehow taking strength away from the Venezuelan constitution. And this collective position, as much as many would defend it, hasn't prevailed. And I would invite everyone to consider that point. A democracy is only complete when the majority of a given people feel engaged and participatory and supportive of it. And so we certainly, as others do, believe in and call for genuine dialogue in Venezuela so that the Venezuelan people themselves can resolve their problems. We deeply regret, certainly, that from the platform of the OAS, the political process in Venezuela has not only not been able to prevail, but which I believe might, in some measure, be a detriment to such process. Thank you. And that's why we voted against. Thank you.
Of Argentina, and will now recognize the delegation of St. Lucia.
Thank you, Chair. St. Lucia takes the floor in support of this resolution and to express dismay at where we are, where Venezuela is, a few days past the sham that is purported to have been a democratic election and the creation of an entity to, in essence, rubber stamp the actions of a regime whose legitimacy is so widely questioned. Our position has been clear and consistent, as have been our past statements on the situation in that country. Quite simply, what has been occurring in Venezuela is an abomination. The people of Venezuela deserve better, and they deserve our outrage. Chair, there is no such thing as partial adherence to a constitution. The rigging of a process so that only certain letters of the law are met while others ignored should not ever be welcomed, and especially not by a brotherhood of nations that we are supposed to be. Ignoring elements of a constitution that call for the free expression of the people by not allowing them to choose their candidates, and further, by not allowing for the expression of political dissent, is evidence of the destruction of democracy, leaving only space for authoritarianism and dictatorship. A reminder to us all that the events of the 6th were telegraphed to us, and no member of this organization can claim ignorance of the end game of the regime, now apparently achieved. It was in 2017 when the regime convened a national constituent assembly, exclusively made up of its supporters, to try to stymie the constitutional authority of the National Assembly. And it was only a few months ago that a new election commission was illegally constituted, and we saw the taking over of leadership parties, of leading opposition parties, through the decisions of a Supreme Court whose independence is questionable. The record will note our moments of silence, be it today, yesterday, last week, or last year, here within the OAS and elsewhere. Chair, to be clear, democracy and its practice can be messy, and recently within our hemisphere, we have seen evidence of this. We have seen the need for the return to the polls in some countries, contested results that have necessitated recounts, and others that have been subject to legal challenges. But I dare say, Chair, that in each and every case, we have been comforted by the knowledge that a system of checks and balances would apply, be they from parties external, concerned about the results of an election within a member state, or parties and agencies internal who are independent. I await an assurance by any of my learned friends that this exists within Venezuela and that its people have access to it. Chair, for those who bemoan the fact that within this, our House of the Americas, we have other family members whose democracy is being challenged, I say you are correct. Let us speak to these issues, but please let us not sulk, denying the Venezuelan people our voices of outrage because of an inequity that exists. Let us be willing to bring to the Permanent Council the concerns that we have about any democratic lapses within our brotherhood. And further, Chair, let us not allow Venezuela to be used as a shield by anyone to mask a closer and critical look at any shortcomings related to democracy and the practice of its core principles in their own countries. Chair, let me close with the following words, often quoted words of Martin Luther King Jr. The ultimate tragedy is not the opposition and cruelty by the bad people, but the silence over that by the good people. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We thank the delegation of St. Lucia for your intervention, and now recognize the delegation of Mexico.
México estaba antes de Uruguay y Venezuela. I don't know if Mexico still wants the floor.
Can you advise the delegation requesting next?
Madam Chair, Mexico was before Uruguay and Venezuela, but they're not there anymore. So it's
Okay.
Uruguay.
Okay. We now recognize the delegation of Uruguay.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. The very last words that the ambassador for St. Lucia shared with us is truly emblematic. We would all agree, I believe, that silence is the worst possible of all companions at the present time. I have the impression that Maduro keeps counting on it. And as successive violations are held and prevail, he feels he's ahead. And no matter what we do, what certainly has to be, however much it takes, repeating the basic principles of the Charter, the Convention on Democratic Principles, and as much as we go back to our principles and believe in them passionately, the long and the short of it is that meanwhile, while we insist, while we take the most vehement and passionate defense of democratic principles, while all of that goes on, while the regime in Venezuela is very well and increasingly entrenched, thank you very much. Senator Eduardo Ortiz has said long since that this has been an ongoing boondoggle. This is a sham. It has been from the start, and it continues to be so as I speak. You know, Giovanni Sartori, who is well respected by all political sciences in the world, stated that for democracy to exist, there has to be a predicate. It has to be free, fair elections, and there has to be sufficient volume to understand that whatever the election results are, they are legitimate and not fraudulent. And the long and the short of it, alas, in Venezuela, is that any pretense of pseudo-democracy is long since lost. The mask has fallen to pieces. We see Venezuela for what it is. We see the Maduro regime in all its naked cruelty. And I say this again in case Mr. Maduro doesn't get it. By his action, he is in fact killing people by standing in the place of those people having a chance to see doctors, having a chance to be assisted by international observers. This is criminal behavior. What other possible description of it could it be? I don't care what label you give it, whether it's a boondoggle, whether it's fraud. You know what it is? Pure and simple, it's dictatorship. Let's call it what it is. You know, when somebody stands up and says, well, you know, there could be a boycott of the opposition. Are you kidding? This is not a boycott, however much some may wish to call it that. This is an overwhelming rejection by the citizenship. And that citizenship has been saying ever more loudly, we cannot take it another minute. We are at our tail end and we're going under. So we cannot dare be silent. Doesn't matter how fatiguing that may be. I don't participate, in those who say, oh, but we need to be respectful. We shouldn't be so intrusive. Not at all. I am of the school that says, call it what it is. If you see a dictator, you call him or her a dictator. And Maduro is a dictator. Let's call him out and call him what he is. You may wish to take a more or less understanding or compassionate tone. That is everyone's individual business. But the fact of the matter is, we can no longer minuet around this particular subject. All of the dilatory tactics, all of the ongoing boring tactics don't kid anybody that has any real sense of what's going on. So what has just gone on is such a farce that you could almost roll around and laugh if it weren't so sad, if it were not, in fact, and I use the word advisedly, tragic, because that's what it has been. So I hope that one fine day, the doors of Venezuelan political life will be thrown wide open under the benevolent gaze of the international community and with the tutelage of international observers. Anything else and anything short of that is, I believe, misguided and cowardly. You're either for democracy or for tyranny. That's where I come down.
We thank the delegation of Uruguay. I now recognize the delegation of Venezuela.
I thank you, Madam Chair. Let me begin my statement by addressing the Permanent Council of the OAS with words of deep gratitude for the adoption of this draft resolution. The majority of the countries sitting around the table that brings us virtually together today know very well when democracy is present and when it is not. And I call on each member of this respectful body to take a hard look at their own respective situations when elections take place and compare those conditions to what went on the other day in Venezuela. I call on each of the countries here to look at the official figures that have been touted, this percentage, the other percentage that have been drawn up by various different specialized organizations in that field. But the fact is, anyone in Venezuela who's over 18 years old can vote. 3,500,000 Venezuelans are not on the voting registry. They're abroad, so they didn't vote. 3 million became 18 since the last registry electoral rolls were updated. 2 million changed their addresses and therefore weren't counted either, or else had to travel hundreds, if not several thousand kilometers to reach the nearest polls. Therefore, according to the government itself, they're above the 70%. They say, and some say, over 80%. But I'm talking about people who were deprived of the right to vote. Some dispassionate observers say that up to 70% of the Venezuelan public were in fact denied the right to vote. And the people who stepped forward to be elected were very often fraudulent and used usurped symbols. So the entire thing was redolent with flaws. Back in 2015, the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, Maduro's party self, lost by 600,000 votes. Now, if we look at the official votes count from Sunday, I'm talking about the official tally now, we see that 2 million votes were lost by the United Social Party. So in a country of 30 million, they only got 3 million. Again, I say, these come from official sources, which no one believes anyway, but the people wishing to perpetrate the fraud. As we've said, many are exiled, a goodly number of others are political prisoners. There is no democracy when the right to vote and the right to be voted is not guaranteed. This didn't happen in conformity with the Constitution. It doesn't meet the minimum threshold of constitutionality. And we all know full well that electoral observation was missing in action, it's the least we can say. And the various stages of the electoral cycle were riddled with faults as well. The European Union tried very hard indeed to be represented. Didn't happen. Didn't happen because there were all kinds of obstacles thrown in the path of the EU coming, demanding travel to be at this point and not at another point. So the legality of the previous run-up to the elections was again riddled with flaws. So, bottom line, from an electoral standpoint, situation in Venezuela, as this resolution now adopted has been very clear in stating, was terribly flawed. And let's not forget that this is not simply a rhetorical observation. It goes hand in hand with tragic human rights violations, which the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights has indeed verified. And so too, the Commissioner of the United Nations Human Rights Commission. The OAS just recently ratified in its commission, Inter-American Commission, the crimes against humanity that continue to be perpetrated by Venezuela. So the question that must be put is, how can this possibly go on? Well, the answer is, it goes on because Nicolás Maduro is perpetuated in power. And I pick up again the very moving and very appropriate reminder of Martin Luther King Jr.'s comment about how evil prevails. And it prevails when the good people remain silent. Hear, hear.
We thank the delegation of Venezuela for his intervention and will now recognize the Secretary General.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. Mexico is requesting the floor.
The delegation of Mexico is recognized.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta. México.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mexico is following very closely events in our sister Republic of Venezuela, and particularly so the election held there on December 6th, above and beyond the actual conditions in which the day of voting took place. Mexico voted against this resolution because it considers that it stands for interventionism and therefore runs counter to the basic principles of this organization that touts itself as being multilateral and that presumes to offer consensual positions. Another reason why Mexico voted against this draft resolution is because it was concocted by a small group of countries with insufficient so-called dialogue by the broad participation of all member states. And by the way, this is a recourse that, alas, is more and more frequent in the OAS. the position of the OAS in the judgment of this delegation is ever more intolerant and partial. That in itself pushes in the wrong direction in the hemisphere. This by no means, I say this, the working of this draft resolution was not truly the result of open and participatory dialogue, nor does it take into account fully the big picture in Venezuela, nor does it speak against sanctions that deeply affect and damage the citizens, which sanctions, by the way, have proven notoriously inefficient. They are damaging to the people. This has been proven time and again over the last years. What have they managed to prove, these sanctions? Very little, other than an increase in tension, increased injury to the people, I say again, and certainly not representative of any presumed openness to dialogue. The OAS is very far away from dialogue at this point, and Mexico deeply regrets this trend. We see it as such, and we oppose it. We need dialogue that is truly participatory, that isn't just paying lip service to it. And in the OAS, it's true that dialogue is messy, but it's still worth fighting for, and I would add, worth practicing. The basic principles of international law and indeed the inter-American principles that we have fashioned together are worth upholding. These negotiations have to be precisely that, negotiated settlements, where our differences are recognized and where the use of force or coercion of any type needs to be summarily rejected. And so Mexico certainly will not take up the position of recognizing governments, because we consider that we're not here to recognize or reject governments. This smacks of interventionism, and that is why we reject it. And I say again, with regret, this runs counter to our much touted multilateralism. Mexico hopes that the Venezuelan people themselves will prove masters of their own destiny without external forces that presume to replace the Venezuelan people and tell them what they really must do. I don't think so. What must be chosen by the Venezuelan people is up to the Venezuelan people themselves. They will see how best they will be governed. Thank you.
And we now offer the floor to Secretary General Almagro.
Gracias, señora Presidente.
All right, thank you very much, Madam Chair. For us here in the OAS, it is a regular feature of our raison d'etre, it would appear, to have to respond to electoral processes in Venezuela. And there are certain constants, there are leitmotifs here. The ongoing abridgment of fundamental freedoms in the Venezuelan people, the constant fraud perpetrated on the electoral process stemming from the systemic dictatorship that is at the helm. Even when the Constituent National Assembly touts itself as being legitimate, and when there was no genuine opposition, there was still an insistence on a single party. And guess what? Even there was fraud perpetrated, believe it or not, with a difference of some 2 in a million some votes, as was pointed out recently. And so above and beyond the typical characteristics of such fraud, and even where there is less and less of a need to uphold it, it is still practiced. And what we see is that it is practiced ever more flagrantly, such that international and national interventionism, call it what you will, pay a price particularly when it comes time to speak to a so-called new legislative assembly. But the long and the short of it is, it isn't creditworthy. This is not a legitimate National Assembly. This is just the last trick perpetrated upon the public by the regime. And the collaborators who themselves were at one point victims of fraud and have since decided to knuckle down and go along with it, offer us a truly pathetic position. Extremism, by the way, isn't just the hallmark of the homegrown Venezuelan element. It is pathetic abroad as well. But the long and the short of it is that this process was illegitimate. It was derailed from the start because guess what? From the start, the regime had no intention to collaborate with anybody's opinion. All the regime wants is to run roughshod over anyone who doesn't kowtow to their most minimum behest and imperative. And so that is bad enough. The worst of it is that all of this happens in violence. The violent solution is to be permissive. The violent solution here is to turn a blind eye, to look elsewhere, not to face the situation clearly. The situation of human rights in Venezuela, we see 7, 8, 9,000 extrajudicial executions per year. What do you call that? There is no equivalent repression in the world, on the planet, that reaches, I won't say the heights, but the abysmal depths to which the Venezuelan people have been cast. Political prisoners, torture, these are the everyday tools of the regime. The crimes against humanity are writ large. The process is ongoing. It is unopposed. As we sit here and talk, what do you think? There are certainly today extrajudicial executions. This isn't put on pause. It's ongoing. Therefore, dictatorship in Venezuela is doing well. Thank you very much. And regrettably, those who pretending or pronouncing whatever reason look askance are, like it or not, part of the problem. When they say, oh, we certainly don't go with violence, but lack of resolute opposition indeed spells at the end of the day support. One becomes complicit. We can talk about the conditions of legitimacy that are essential to the government, but we have multilateralism here, and the hallmark of multilateralism, as we construe it in the inter-American system, must rise up to defend human rights, must rise up to speak against this position. Of course, multilateralism is pacific in its heart because we seek pacific means, but what has to happen is for the extrajudicial executions to end, for the political prisoners to be set free. That's what we look for. We long for democracy in Venezuela. Democracy understood as a system that upholds human rights. There is no dictatorship that can for long wear the fig leaf of democracy, and certainly no democracy worthy of the name that ends up in this situation and in the kind of dictatorship we see before us. Thank you.
We thank Secretary General for his intervention. And note that there are no more requests for the floor. So we have now concluded the order of business for this special meeting. And we thank all the delegations that participated and made comments today, which will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. I thank you all again for your participation. The meeting is adjourned.